Morning, everyone. It's my privilege to introduce today's keynote speaker, Assembly Speaker Anthony Rendon. Speaker Rendon Speaker Rendon was elected to the Assembly in 2012, representing parts of Southeast Los Angeles. In 2016, he was elected by his colleagues as the 70th Speaker of the California State Assembly and the 5th Latino Speaker in the state's history. He is now the longest-serving Speaker in 27 years. Under Speaker Rendon's leadership, the Assembly restored funding for early childhood education, extended California's clean air goals, and established the nation's first $15 minimum wage. From a Jewish community perspective, Speaker Rendon has been an incredible ally and a longtime friend of JPAC's. As a former educator and nonprofit executive, he knows the impact a state can have in supporting kids, low-income people, and older adults. He has championed increased state investment in older adult services like SSI and MSSP, programs many of our Jewish human service agencies are involved with. Last year, he was incredibly supportive of our request with the Jewish Caucus to secure $36 million for the Holocaust Survivor Assistance Program, offering more support to aging survivors in California than any other state and even the federal government. He has also been a strong ally in the fight against extremism and hate. He appointed past JPAC board member Chair C.C. Filer to the new Commission on the State of Hate and is helping to ensure the Nonprofit Security Grant Program receives record funding in recent years. We're honored to have him join us today. Please give a warm welcome to Speaker Anthony Rendon.
Thank you. Good morning. It's an honor to be here. I have been up for a while. My wife's out of town for 2 weeks, so it's me and a 3.5-year-old. I sent my wife a photo. I was so proud of the ponytail that I'd done, and she was not impressed. So we got some work to do. And we've got a lot of work to do in Sacramento as well. This has been, you come at a good time. This has been an incredibly busy month or so, which is good. So often in Sacramento, there are these, I always talk about this job as being sort of a roller coaster. Particularly right now, we have so many freshmen, and I'm kind of talking them through the legislative calendar. There's a lot of ebbs and flows. Right now is one of our busiest times. We had House of Origin committee deadlines last week. This week, we're getting ready for appropriations, which means all the members will hate me, even more so than they do already. We're going to see a lot of bills die, and with 21 freshmen, we're going to see bills die for the first time in a lot of instances. So it'll be an interesting time. And it's a good time to come and talk to members about all that's important to you. I was having and we also have this big labor convention in town. Obviously, you're in town. Yesterday was UC Day. I think I saw Howard Walensky here, my good friend who I had. There's Howard. I had dinner with Howard the other night. I remember the first time we ever met. You said there's two issues I care about, the University of California and Jewish issues. This is a perfect week for you. A perfect week for Howard, and it was a great week to have dinner. Howard and I had dinner Monday night. We were having a really good time. You know, my entire life is sort of broken up into 15 and 30-minute increments. Yep, there it is. And we were having this really great conversation, this really great discussion, and I had to run out at a really great moment. But what Howard was talking about a book that he's reading called Palestine 1936. And he said, you know, I wrestle with this question of what is a Jew? And I thought that was a great question because for me, ultimately, it's, again, and I think a lot of you have heard me say this, it's those very simple questions that have always resonated with me. For me, I grew up in a family, I grew up in a home. My dad was always working 3 jobs. My mom was working full-time. I had 5 cousins who were killed in gang violence before they were 15 years of age. Very working-class environment. I was, the polite term that they used in the mid-'80s was academically disqualified. I was asked to leave school. And I was 19, 20 years old. I was working in factories and warehouses, unloading trucks on the graveyard shift. And I met a lot of people who were probably 10 years younger than I am now. Folks in their mid-40s who I worked with, whose bodies were banged up and from having unloaded trucks and all of that for 20-some years. And I had this very strong sense of not knowing what I wanted to do in life, but not wanting to do that for sure. And when Howard talks about public education, higher education in this state, I would fall asleep on the bus coming home, 8 a.m., after unloading trucks for 8, 9 hours. And I'd come home and I'd fall asleep on the bus. And you fall asleep to the sort of rocking motion of the bus. And when the bus stops, you'd wake up. And it would stop in front of a community college, Cypress Community College. And that's what would wake me up every morning. And one day I looked out and I saw the kids, 18, 19 years old, looking way better than I was looking after unloading trucks for 12 hours. And I thought, I don't know what they're doing, but that's better than what I'm doing. And tuition back then in 1988 was $5 a class at the community college system. Later, I transferred to Cal State Fullerton. Tuition was $283 a semester. When I went to the University of California to get my PhD, tuition, I ended up graduating without any college loans at all. This whole conversation about debt retirement is yay. You're not applauding me, you're applauding California in the 1980s and 1990s, although we're trying to get back there. For me, this conversation about public education that Howard and I so often have is a conversation that resonates with me. I went through the entire public education system. And when Howard asks questions, fundamental questions about, you know, what is a Jew? For me, it's interesting because what I fell in love with, I said when I got off the bus and decided to go to school, I didn't think, oh, I'm going to get a degree and then work for a nonprofit and then become Speaker of the Assembly. First of all, because I didn't know what the hell the Speaker of the Assembly was, and most Californians don't either. But I just thought, I want to get off this bus, and I want to get out of this warehouse, and I want to get out of this factory. But what I fell in love with, as I've said before, was fundamental questions, right? The first class I ever had at a community college was a professor by the name of Dr. Wexner. And so often you have these stories of, I shouldn't have said his name because I'm going to say something bad about him. So often you have these stories about professors who change your life because they're so great and so exciting. And this guy wasn't that exciting. He was the opposite of exciting. And I remember I'd sort of like literally fall asleep in class, literally. And I was also working full-time too, which didn't help. And I had to go, I remember thinking like, oh man, I have to read the textbooks now. This is terrible. And the first textbook I ever read was for that class. It was Plato's Republic. Book 1, Part 1, line 23, Zenon says to Socrates, what is justice? You have not spoken of justice. And that resonated with me immediately. For somebody who grew up in a home where you saw gang violence all the time, the question of what is justice resonated for me. For somebody who grew up in a home where his dad loved his mom so much, and all they wanted to do is spend time with each other, but they never really could because they were always working, this question of economic justice was important to me. And it's those fundamental questions that led me not only to stay in school, but to get a PhD in philosophy. Philosophy is comprised of 5 questions only, right? Will Durant says this, right? There's 5 questions. What is justice? What is beauty? What is truth? What is knowledge? And what is right and wrong? That's all philosophy is. You answer those 5 questions, you're done. Few do. And for me, it was those fundamental questions that drew me here to begin with. I left the university, did some postdoc work at Boston University, worked in the nonprofit sector in gang programs and early childhood education. And for me, I had this sense that I was answering the question of justice. Justice was a place where children had a head start. Justice was a place where there were intervention programs that kept people from the same lives that my cousins had and that ended too soon. For me, it was those fundamental questions. And then on June 30th, July 1st, 2011, when the funding for my nonprofit was cut from $31 per child per day to $17 per child per day, and I had to go in and tell 800 families that they weren't going to have services come Monday, that was injustice, and it was that sense of injustice that drove me here. Again, hearkening back, going back, focusing on very fundamental questions. When you come to Sacramento, you get a sense of the incredible diversity of the state. I'm from urban Los Angeles. I remember looking across the assembly chambers my first year, and I saw Frank Bigelow, who's now a good friend, and he's wearing this big cowboy hat. I'm thinking, what do I have in common with this guy? When Brian Dawley was the minority leader, Republican minority leader, we check in once a week during recess. I'd call him up. Recess is the fall. I'd call him up, and he'd answer the phone. It would be very loud, and he'd say, it's harvest. I go, oh, it's not in LA. You have you get this incredible sense of the diversity of the state. Silicon Valley, in my neck of the woods, it's all about the goods movement. It's all about import, export. Obviously, entertainment is so incredibly important, and farming is so incredibly important. And it's very difficult, or I should say maybe it's very easy to get sort of discursive, right? It's very easy to get kind of distracted by different things and to get sort of lost in the complexity of issues. But if you have guiding principles, if you have a sense of right and wrong, if you have a sense of what you're looking for, of just trying to focus on a singular idea, whether you're looking at issues around Silicon Valley or issues of farming, if you're just trying to find what is right and what is just, then that guides you. And ultimately, for me, that has been what has guided me. And that's what's so important to me about JPAC and all that you stand for. I remember my first visit to Israel. Obviously a place that has been sacred for 3 religions. And I remember going there, and I've been an atheist since 8th grade. I've been an atheist since I was 13 years old. And I remember, and I think part of why that happened was because I grew up in such a religious family. Remember going to Israel and wondering how I would feel about Israel, how I would feel about being in a place with so much, obviously, religious symbolism and religious meaning. For me, Israel was, during those visits, and today continues to be about an idea, continues to be, obviously, a very real place, but about an idea, about a goal, about a sense of what can be. And for me, every day when I walk in the Capitol, for me, I cling to that same notion of, when you talk about Plato's Republic and you talk about trying to achieve a sense of Platonic forms, you cannot achieve justice. We know that, right? We've been trying for 23 centuries in philosophy to sort of hone that, right? We know we can't achieve justice. What we try to do is to get as close as we possibly can so that we can approximate it, so that we can start to think of it in terms that translates in a real sense, in a tangible sense, that into people's lives in a way that they see justice coming from our actions. That's what this organization stands for. This is my final term, so I'm starting to speak in past tense. This is what I hope I have stood for during my 6 terms in Sacramento. This organization means so incredibly much to me, means so incredibly much to our caucus. The Jewish caucus, particularly under recent leadership, has really taken the mantle and really become an incredible force within not only our caucus, but within our legislature, and their efforts should be applauded. So I applaud you for being here. I applaud you for always seeking justice, and thank you for coming to Sacramento.